Hello students, we'll continue studying the third chapter of history, that is an empire across three continents. In this video, we will study management of labor by Columella, social hierarchies in Rome, cultural transformation of the Roman world from 4th to 17th centuries. Management of labor by Columella. The Roman agricultural writers paid a great deal of attention to the management of labor. Columella, a first-century writer who came from the south of Spain, recommended the following points. Landowners should keep a reserve stock of implements and tools twice as many as they needed, so that production could be continuous. For the loss in slave labor time exceeds the cost of such items. There was a general presumption among employers that without supervision no work would ever get done. So supervision was paramount for both free workers and slaves. To make supervision easier, workers were sometimes grouped into gangs or smaller teams. Columella recommended squads of 10, claiming it was easier to tell who was putting in effort and who was not in work group of this size. This shows a detailed consideration of the management of labor. Pliny the Elder, the author of a very famous natural history, condemned the use of slave gangs as the worst method of organizing production, mainly because slaves who worked in gangs were usually chained together by their feet. The elder Pliny described conditions in the factories of Alexandria. A seal is put upon the workmen's aprons. They have to wear a mask or a net with a close mesh on their heads, and before they are allowed to leave the premises, they have to take off all their clothes. Agricultural labor must have been fatiguing and disliked this system, so Egyptian peasants deserted their villages in order not to engage in agricultural work. The same was probably true of most factories and workshops. A law of 398 referred to workers being branded so they could be recognized if and when they run away and try to hide. Many private employers cast their agreements with the workers in the form of debt contracts. A lot of the poorer families went into debt bondage in order to survive. Parents sometimes sold their children into servitude for periods of 25 years. The late 5th century Emperor Anastasius built the eastern frontier city of Dara in less than 3 weeks by attracting labor from all over the east by offering high wages. Social hierarchies in Rome. The social structures of the empire are as follows: senators, equites, that is horsemen and knights, the respectable section of the people, that is the middle class, lower class, and finally the slaves. In the early 3rd century, when the Senate numbered roughly 1,000, approximately half of all the senators still came from Italian families. By the late empire, the senators and the equites had merged into a unified and expanded aristocracy. The middle class now consisted of the considerable mass of persons connected with imperial service in the bureaucracy and army, but also the more prosperous merchants and farmers, of whom there were many in the eastern provinces. Below them were the vast mass of the lower classes, known collectively as humilores, literally lower. They comprised a rural labor force, of which many were permanently employed on the large estates, workers in industrial and mining establishments, migrant workers who supplied much of the labor for the grain and olive harvests and for the building industry, self-employed artisans, etc. One writer of the early 5th century tells us that the aristocracy based in the city of Rome drew annual incomes of up to 4,000 pounds of gold from their estates, not counting the produce they consumed directly. The late Roman bureaucracy, both the higher and middle echelons, was a comparatively affluent group because it drew the bulk of its salary in gold and invested much of this in buying up assets like land. There was, of course, also a great deal of corruption, especially in the judicial system and in the administration of military supplies. Cultural transformation of the Roman world from 4th to 17th centuries. The traditional religious culture of the classical world, both Greek and Roman, had been polytheist. That is, involved a multiplicity of cults that included both Roman, Italian gods like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and Mars, as well as numerous Greek and Eastern deities worshipped in thousands of temples, shrines, and sanctuaries throughout the empire. At the cultural level, the period saw momentous developments in religious life, with the Emperor Constantine made Christianity as the official religion. Overexpansion had led Diocletian to cut back by abandoning territories with little strategic or economic value. Diocletian also fortified the frontiers, reorganized provincial boundaries, and separated civilian from military functions, granting greater autonomy to the military commanders, who now became a more powerful group. The monetary system of the late empire broke with the silver-based currencies of the first 3 centuries because the Spanish silver mines were exhausted and government ran out of sufficient stocks of the metal to support a stable coinage in silver. Constantine founded new monetary system on gold, and there was vast amounts of this in circulation. Constantine's chief innovations were in the monetary sphere, where he introduced a new denomination, the solidus, a coin of 4.5 grams of pure gold that would in fact outlast the Roman Empire itself. That means the solidi would last even longer than the Roman Empire. Solidi were minted on a very large scale and their circulation ran into millions. The other area of innovation was division of Roman Empire into East and West, and the creation of a second capital at Constantinople, at the site of modern Istanbul in Turkey and previously called Byzantium, surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. In the west, the empire fragmented politically as Germanic groups from the north, Goths, Vandals, Lombard, etc., took over all the major provinces and established kingdoms that are best described as post-Roman kingdoms. By the early 17th century, the war between Eastern Rome and Iran had flared up again, and the Sasanians, who had ruled Iran since the 3rd century, launched a whole-scale invasion of all the major eastern provinces, including Egypt. Thank you.